All right, that's the first conversation we're having this morning. A recent report by the National Bureau of Statistics says the nation's GDP has grown, or rather, it grew by 3.98%. That's approximately 4% in the last quarter of last year, sustaining a positive trajectory. So it's going higher. So how do you juxtapose that with inflation figures and all other figures that we always get? Let's take a look at this and the impact on the economy and Nigerians. First of guest this morning is joining us virtually. Johnson Chukwu is MD, Carry Asset Management Limited. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Chukwu.
Thank you, and Analyse, for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So, is there anything to cheer? Let's begin from there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you are coming from a recessionary period, as we had in 2020, and your economy has begun to grow at a rate above population growth rate, it's something to cheer, because over time, if our economy consistently grows at that rate, we will gradually begin to reduce the number of people living at poverty. We will gradually begin to see improvement in our standard of living. And basically, when you mention inflation, remember that what happens that when inflation begins to moderate, if the level of productivity improves. So it's something to cheer. Cast your mind back to 2020. The economy contracted by about 1.98%, 1.92%. And now we're talking about a growth of about 3.4% year on year. So that's an improvement, material improvement. Of course, we shouldn't fail to take cognizance of the fact that growth was partly influenced by the fact that the previous year, the economy depressed or went into a recession. So we are growing from a lower base. But all the same, a growth of 3.4%, which is the highest we've had since 2015. Actually, 2015 is something it's a form of relief to all of us.
Okay, Mr. Chukwu, what exactly would you attribute this marginal growth to?
Yes, I did mention earlier that we have what we call base effect. The economic depressed went down in 2020 by 1.92%. So we are growing from a lower base. In effect, what you would, to put it in a very graphical format, it's like you are growing. If you say if you grow from 2 to 3, that's a 50% growth. But if you grow from 4 to 5, it's still one unit that you have grown. But 4 to 5 will give you only a 25% growth. But if you grow from 2 to 3, it is considered as you have grown by 50%. So what happened is that the economy went into the size of the economy contracted in 2020. So when we grew back to where we were, and you measure that from where we had gotten to, where we had depressed to, it gives an impression of a much higher growth. But if you look at the sectors that actually contributed to that growth rate, the strongest growth we saw was in the financial services sector that grew about 10%. That's recorded the highest growth we had that last year. And then you had sectors like the telecommunications sector that grew by about 5.6%. The trade sector also grew strong by about 8%. So those sectors drove the growth we saw in 2020. Of course, there are laggards like the oil and gas sector that contracted.
You know, when we hear these figures from time to time, Mr. Chukwu, the question that comes to my mind is, how does this affect the man on the street? But before we get to that one, how do states contribute? I'm still not satisfied, by the way, about your explanation concerning inflation figure vis-a-vis economic GDP figures. Because at the end of the day, how will the economy grow when it doesn't have a direct impact on people's lives? That's the question a number of people would be asking you, and that's why they will be wondering. All economists want to do is just to give you the figures. So help us understand better the growth of GDP vis-a-vis inflation figures, which is also, of course, not as friendly as one would expect.
Okay, let me start from a simple definition of a layman definition of inflation. Inflation is basically when too much money is purchasing few goods. What that means is that the economy is not producing as much goods as is growing the money in circulation. And what happens is that when the economy begins to grow more goods and services, produce more goods and services, and the volume of money in circulation does not change, people will now, the market power will move from the buyer, from the seller to the buyer. So the seller will be in a weaker position in the sense that they are now asking you to pay a smaller amount of money to get the goods because they are competing for your share of wallet. Because your money has not increased, but then the quantity of goods available have increased. So what happens is that those who are producing those goods and services will be asking you to pay a reduced amount of money so that you can buy from them. And that's basically why we say that, look, when the level of productivity in the economy improves and there's no commensurate increase in the level of money in circulation, then inflation will begin to moderate. And basically, if you are buying a product, for instance, for 20 naira, and because there's so much supply of that product in the market, and because the sellers are selling it to buy 18 naira, the inflation will, well, you're actually going to have what we call deflation, or the rate at which they are able to increase price will reduce, which is basically what we call reduced rate of inflation. So that's the connection between level of productivity and inflation rate. And one of the challenges we've had in inflation is because food production actually declined over a period of time because of insecurity in the major food belt of the country. And because of that decline, the quantity of food that is produced reduced, and Nigerians have to beg to pay more to buy those available food. Remember the inflation uptick we had came about when we shut down the border. And then the volume of rice and other commodities coming from the land border reduced. But Nigerians still had to buy to feed themselves. They were still consuming the same quantity of goods. So they were ready to scramble and pay more for those available goods. That's basically what the connection. That's why I said, look, if the economy goes into a high level of productivity and produces more goods and services without a commensurate increase in the amount of money in circulation, you are going to see a reduction in inflation rate.
How does this growth affect the life of the common man on the street who's already grappling with rising prices and stagnant incomes?
Well, what we are going to see is that there's always what they call lag effect in economic terms. Lag effect means that it takes some time before economic policies or development of the economy begin to cascade down the entire population. If you cast your mind back to the Obasanjo era, there was a time when the argument was that we're having growth that people could not feel. But over time, people began to enjoy the benefit of that growth. Level of unemployment declined, purchasing power improved, exchange rate improved, and then Nigerians were coming back to this country from diaspora to want to come back to settle the country. The country became a priority destination for investors. So it takes some time to mature. For instance, I had mentioned earlier that the growth rate of 3.4% is higher than the population growth of about 3%. What that means is that if we continue to add the value of goods and services we produce in the country, it's increasing every year by 3.4%. And then the number of people we're adding is increasing by 3%. We are adding additional 0.4% above the population, above what we are consuming. That will build up our savings. That will build up resources that will make it easier for people to have access to resources. And the thing you have to recognize that when the economy is growing, it simply means there is more production, there's more productivity. It simply means that companies are producing goods and their goods are being consumed or demanded for. So they are going to go to the labor market and ask for more employment or more labor, which will lead to a reduction in the level of unemployment. But these things does not happen spontaneously. It's going to take some time because when you produce, you have to sell the goods and you have to ask for additional labor when you realize, oh, really, I can't stay even further. Because initially we say, okay, let's increase our shift with existing staff. But when you exhaust your capacity to increase your shift, you may now say, okay, let's build additional plant. Let's expand our plant. So that will require you asking for additional equipment, asking for additional labor, asking for other input materials. That's the way it works. So there's always that lag effect. But the most important thing is that your economy should grow at a rate above your population growth rate. And that's only when, over time, you're going to begin to see the impact on the population.
The question that many people will still want to ask is, generally people are not patient because, as Halero mentioned, the buying power seems to be struggling with the things to buy and all of that. But When we talk about the growth of the economy, of Nigeria's economy, we talk about it at the federal, national level, holistic, right? What role do states have to play in all of these, and how can the states contribute to this, help speed up this process that you're talking about so that people can begin to feel the impacts quicker? Don't forget, the federal government does not have a state. It's the states that make up the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and it is in the states that the people live. So is there a role for state governments or state government agencies and all of that in this whole process you're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. You know, we talk of GDP growth. We're actually aggregating the value of goods and services produced in the country. And like you say, the production and consumption centers are the states. The federal government, which is only based in Abuja, really, is just a small piece of the activity or great account of a small piece of the level of consumption and level of production. So production actually takes place at the peripheries or the centers or the states. The key thing that the states have to do is that in the first place, they need to work towards reducing the cost of doing business in their states. And that will come in the form of building supporting infrastructure that will encourage productive activity at lower cost. Two, the states have to be more efficient in their tax administration so that you do not overburden people. You are also able to extract revenue from the people who are working in your state, and you deploy these resources effectively and efficiently to improve the economic environment. The third factor, or the fourth factor, is the policy environment. The policy environment will come in the form of, are there incentives that are created by states to encourage private sector investment? And two, is the state working towards creating the opportunities or the resources or the critical capital investment that are required by private sector to situate in those states? The reality is that a few states in the country have become the centers of private sector investment because of the environment that the state government have created. Lagos State, for instance, accounts for about 40% of our consumption. And that means, and more than a significant portion of our production activities, productive activities in the country, because people see the environment as reasonably security free. It's security free. Not that there's any part of the country that's completely free from it, high level insecurity. But Lagos seems to be like an oasis away from other states. Again, you have a government consistently over time that works, and that's what private sector people are looking for. Where insecurity worsens, private sector will move away from that place. So the key thing is that for us to grow the economy, the states are the critical contributors to what happens, because it's at the state level that consumption takes place, at the state level that production also takes place.
Sustainability of this thing is one thing that we need to look at. You've given the example of Lagos, and everyone in Nigeria seems to be looking in that direction. But you know, the question that one would want to ask is, what role does leadership have to play in all of this conversation that we are having? You cited the former President Olusegun Obasanjo's era and how things went at the time. I don't know if people can say the same thing as of this moment. And what we are having today is not something that started yesterday. It is also historical. So, on the one hand, what role does leadership have to play in this? And if it is a leadership problem that we have, how about the system? How about institutionalizing the process so that irrespective of who comes in government, there is a role to play and they are playing it as it ought to be played?
Okay, I would say that leadership, it starts and ends with leadership. Leadership determines the culture, and sometimes we think culture falls from heaven. It is consistent practice that is called culture. Leadership defines the culture. Leadership defines the core values of the society. And leadership also prioritizes what is critical and important to the society, including, do we want to focus on the economy? What kind of economy do we want to have? How do we ensure that we have the right labor to fit into the kind of economy we have to have? Leadership defines all those things. So it starts and ends with the leadership. One of the live examples I always like to present as a proof of concept is that it's leadership that really defines the telecommunication sector that today accounts the third largest contributor to the economy. Because with all due respect to, without really being patronizing, Obasanjo's government came up with a telecommunication law that made it possible for private sector investors to invest in that sector without the government trying to build it. Because some of the things that we've had in the past or subsequently that the government wants to be at the commanding height of businesses, and they don't want to create just the environment and allow the private sector to bring capital to those areas. So leadership is everything. I wouldn't talk about what current leadership has done, but I think the key thing, the report card is there. This is the highest growth we've seen since the beginning of the current government. If you cast your mind back, in 2014, this economy grew by about 6.22%. In 2015, when the government came in, it grew by 2.79%. By 2016, the economy contracted by 1.58%, only to grow by 0.82% in 2017, and then 1.91% in 2018, and then 2019 it grew by 2.27%, only to go down again at 1.92% in 2020. And then, luckily for us, it's not just luck. Of course, we know, like I said, I talked about the factor that contributed to that. We grew at 3.4%. So this is the best we've seen in a couple of years. And it's all hitting is that the focus of the government has been on economic management. Are we really coming up with the appropriate policies that will incentivize the investment in this economy, incentivize productive activity in the economy, and are we consistently pursuing those policies? These are the questions that the government must always agitate their mind.
Well, you haven't really answered that question, but we're going to get to it. Dr. Olusegun Omishakin has since joined us. He is with us in the studio, Chief Economist and Director of Research and Development, Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, your take on this growth disclosed by the NBS about Nigeria's GDP by 3.98% in the last quarter. This smile on your face is suspect.
I'm just trying to reflect on the need to always discuss growth every time we have the numbers, and people try to juxtapose the numbers.
But isn't it
with
about
reality.
the numbers?
So I know we always come back to that, but do we feel it? But are we seeing it? But again, whatever discussion that we need to have, first of all, let's set it within the context of the data. Then we talk about why do we have that difference between what the data says and what people are feeling. So it's a commendable growth, whether you view it from the fact that last year, 2020 growth was in a decline, and then 2021 seems to be very high. Yes, you can see, yes, that's the base effect. Whatever explanation, but growth is growth. It's commendable, because when you are advocating for a better economy, for stability in the macro environment, for investments to come in, everything starts from how you are growing. And there is no way you can have a sustained growth, fast growth, an economy that is competitive when you don't grow at all. So let's see what happens. There are still a lot of issues to discuss around growth and how growth is linked to inclusive growth and the business environment and our external balance in general. Growth is growth.
Allow me to make this sound a little simplistic.
Okay.
So let's say, is it as simple, is this growth thing you're talking about and people not feeling it, as simple as someone having value, but the value not being represented in the person's bank account? For instance, okay, this person is valued at this, but he doesn't have money in his bank account. Is it that simple?
No, I think let me follow the example you have told. I think it's a matter of definition. Okay. For instance, you can have a value in terms of, somebody can say, okay, so have plots of land, and the person can still be trekking everywhere, hungry. Because it's all about definition. If the plot of land is not what is used in the economy, is not what is convertible to naira and kobo for you to buy, you have to say, I have the plot of land, and then you make sure that that discussion is separate from, I don't have money. GDP is not a true measure of welfare, and I think that's what people should know. And this is a long, well-debated issue. So when people see GDP growth rate, they quickly want to think about people on the street. But that's not what MBS is telling us.
It doesn't really affect them, does it?
That's not the essence of the data.
Okay.
What's the essence of the data?
The essence of the data from a gross domestic product measures the value of what you are producing domestically, right? And when you say producing, you are not referring to the people on the street, as it were. Get me right?
Okay.
And again, when the survey is conducted, and just like in any survey analysis, you don't go house to house and interview about 200 million people to say, what have you produced? Okay, let's record it, let's do this. So there are issues around sampling, and when you get that one out, what you are discussing again is not a matter of how does this growth affect you, who is earning what. For instance, if you are 10, if we are 3 here, you produce a good words 10 million. I'm producing 500,000. You are producing 1,000. And then the interview was conducted for her, myself. And then they say, oh, we are growing by so. It's her growth and my growth that seems to matter. But so for you feel...
So you've excluded me.
Not that you are not... No. You are not excluded. Don't get me. I'm only trying to let you know that...
No, I
you
know,
don't
but
use
I'm
that
just saying...
to just say you are better off, right? Because to say, am I better off, the question would then come to how has the growth distributed? How has the income been distributed? Do you get my point? Not what is the income. What is the income question is, what is our worth in this family? Another question is, what is my share? And then for you to ask what is your share, you then have to have I contributed to this? So if the minority are the one contributing to the growth, then the majority will not feel it.
But is this part of the issues that you said need to be... My apologies, Alero. Is it part of the issues that you said still need to be discussed concerning this matter?
Yes. And I first established the fact that this is a good starting point. Nobody should take that one from the government. But there are issues that goes beyond GDP growth rates.
Okay, Doctor. In saying that this was a good thing, you also went ahead to mention investment.
Yep.
Now, how conducive is our country at the moment to attract any kind of investment, whether overseas, from overseas, or even within Nigeria? Is it the right time for Nigerians to begin to invest and look at starting up new businesses?
Well, it depends on the type of investment we are talking about. Whatever type of investment, we all know that the environment is not conducive. And because investment, business environment, it's not just a function of GDP growth rate. In fact, as a matter of fact, if you had a better conducive environment, you will have recorded higher growth rate. You have foreign direct investment cut off, like we are not there. You have a foreign portfolio investment that we used to be proud of. And in fact, then we used to say, oh, this doesn't really matter on the long run because people just bring in the money, they take the money out. But that, again, is not there now. So we are doing pretty bad when it comes to the investment environment and attracting investors. And there are so many factors that would explain that. Yeah.
It's better for us to have them invest and be carrying out the money than for them not to come at all.
No, what I'm saying is, one is better than the other. You come, you invest, infrastructure, build this, build that. The other one is you come, you invest in the short-term portfolio. In the market, you put in your money there, you earn the profits, you pull out. It happens everywhere. But what I'm now saying is, even for both, we are not doing good.
Okay, let me ask you this, Dr. Omishaki. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Chukwu wants to contribute as well, but let me ask you this. You've talked about the need to make the investment climate better. Mr. Chukwu, speaking earlier, also said there is a role for the states to play in all of this. Part of what he said was that, look, the states need to help make the investment environment, the business environment, a little more conducive by reducing certain costs, which has been the function that the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council has been trying to play over the past 5 years plus. In your opinion, in order to help these figures reflect quicker in people's lives, what are the things that states need to do? What are the roles that the states themselves need to play so that we can fast track this? Because as far as the people are concerned, if the growth is only in numbers and not in their pockets, it's no growth.
Yeah, I agree with him 100%. There is the emphasis has always been on the federal government or the national at the national level. Yes, and the reasons are obvious. When you talk about major macro indicators that are needed to attract investors, you don't talk about the role of states there. The FX stability, the inflation stability, and so many other factors. Yes, we all know we are not, that's in itself, could be a problem. But at the state level, I think the subnationals over time, both the economic analysts and even the political, environment are not really are not really seeing themselves as playing huge role. You will hear state governors lamenting that the government needs to do more to attract the investor.
Then you ask
Meanwhile,
yourself,
they
which
are the
government?
government.
What are you doing? Hardly would you. I think that except one state that was involved with their history of doing business analysis and the rest, a state who came up to say, okay, let's do history of doing, let's replicate what the federal government is doing. Let's look at our tax condition, let's look at our infrastructure, let's look at so many things. But you hardly hear that among other states. We all know how it runs. So the role of states is very important. In fact, if the states are doing better, the question of are people feeling it will not be there. Because at that level, especially the informal market, the informal economy resides not in Abuja, but in the states. Yeah. So if they come up with a clear economic strategy as to how do we attract investors, how do we make registering businesses or making things easy within our own local economy, I think people will not be so will not be angry with NPS data.
Is that in any way inferring that the intervention of the federal government, the partnership between the federal government and the states is not as strong or efficient as it ought to be?
Yeah, for some times, yes, but I think now we are seeing some improvement. At the NESG, we are not just speaking to the national government or at the national level. We are also partnering with the state governors at the NGF, the Nigerian Governors Forum. And they've done a lot of, advocacies and initiatives as to how to, first of all, replicate what the federal government is doing or key into national plans and so many other economic and financial or investment initiatives. Yes, I think it's getting a little bit better, but they need to, there is a need for a serious improvement at the state level.
Do you see a buy-in of the people in the states to the initiatives of the state governments?
You mean people by people, you mean?
The businesses, small businesses and all of that?
Of course. Of course. In fact, most of the initiatives you are seeing have been brought up by most businesses. Businesses are not, I don't think that businessmen or business, because again, we have to look at it properly. These are informal markets. Most of them are these, not really talking about Ogun, Lagos, and Kano, all these major states. In other states, Osun, it's all about the people that are selling basic things. So if they see transparency, openness in the way you go about your tax administrations and the rest, they will support the government.
Okay. But Mr. Chukwu, how much of this growth can be attributed to the private sector? I mean, arising from the analysis he just gave us.
If you look at the growth we saw, and you look at the sector that drove that growth, I had mentioned the financial services sector. That is 100% in the private sector hand. I had mentioned trade. That's 100% in the private sector's hand. And I've also mentioned telecommunication sector. These were the fastest growing sectors in the economy. In terms of GDP contribution, the order is you have agriculture, which accounts for about 26% of the GDP, followed by trade about 15.6%, followed by ICT, then followed by manufacturing, and then you have the construction industry. This sector, or the real estate industry, all these sectors are largely in the hands of the private sector. But for the agricultural sector, where the government is doing a lot to encourage agricultural activities, I would say that the other sectors are largely driven by the policy environment and the huge market that Nigeria has. Because of our size, we naturally have a huge market. And that is what is driving the trade sector, driving the telecommunications sector, driving the construction industry. So I think on the balance, one would say that over 95% of the growth we saw in the economy was private sector driven. Beyond that, in terms of policies, one would normally say that the policies of the government have been, at the fiscal side of it, have actually been weak. If there is any policy coming from the government that is encouraging productive activities coming from the monetary authorities, where, for instance, the manufacturing sector is enjoying sub-market interest rates. But Nigerian economy today, in terms of productive activity, in terms of consumption, is largely driven by the private sector.
Doc, Festus Akimboyewa says that the increase in international price of oil may have contributed to the recent economic growth. How true is that?
Not really, at least according to data that we have.
So that didn't play any part at all?
No. We can't say it didn't play any part at all.
Okay.
There are always direct, indirect impacts and so many things. But when you look at data, the question is, when the oil price declined, then we attributed failure when we enter into recession to, it's global oil prices. Now, the oil prices have been going up. And
up and up.
So the question is, how do you appropriate that advantage? It's not just automatic that the oil price is going up so you get more. It depends on how much you are producing. So if the price of Gary is going up in the market and you are a Gary producer, you can't just sit down and be happy and say, oh, no. You have to quickly make sure that you increase your production to appropriate the benefit. We are not doing that. We have serious challenges with oil production. In fact, we are doing beyond the OPEC plus quota. We are doing worse than we were doing when the oil price was low. And so I know the government is also tackling that. So and then the sector is still contracted. So much of the growth that we're seeing now and we've been seeing for some quarters are driven by the non-oil sector. That doesn't mean that indirect impacts are not there. For instance, your FX, government gets most of the revenue, the foreign earning from the same sector. So you can't really say, oil sector is dead. But when it comes to basic economic activities, the non-oil sector, just like what he just mentioned now, are the main drivers of the Nigerian economy for now. But if we appropriate that, we get the environment clear, you understand the PIA is passed, and then people were of the opinion that this will be a game changer. And then suddenly you have the government saying, let's postpone the implementation, especially on the side of the subsidy removal implementation. So these are the signals that are still affecting the sector till now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I want to ask you both a question. Mr. Chukwu, you started the other time by talking about some policies that we have employed that has helped one way or another. And when we're talking about non-oil sector, the natural one that will first of all come to many people's minds will be agriculture, right? And we've been talking about agriculture for how many years now? I remember there are policies of government around agriculture date back pre-independence. I recall the first of them being the Farm Settlement Scheme or something like that. And virtually every government in Nigeria has initiated one policy or another in trying to mainstream agriculture. Do you see us as a nation focusing on one major revenue earner beyond oil? Just like Dubai did when they decided to create an economy for themselves that they didn't have before, or Singapore, or Rwanda. Do you see a situation or a time in our country where we decide we focus our energies, everything that we need to do, our education, our health, even our petroleum, along the line of, say, this agriculture that is supposed to be our cash cow, so to speak, pre-independence and even into independence before oil became before the oil boom? That was it. Do you see a time or a need for us to focus on this particular one and channel all energies along that direction?
What I would say is that the focus on agricultural sector has been, like rightly pointed out, has been the trend in the history of this country. If you remember, we had Operation Feed the Nation, we had the Green Revolution, we have had all sorts of catch wars and policies focused primarily on agriculture. You would actually say that the policies of the government of Nigeria in the past have largely been skewed in favor of agriculture. But unfortunately, I must say this, agriculture will at best be a source of what we call national food security. Agriculture is never and can never be a source for a country to leapfrog into a developed economy. Agriculture is at the base of human engagement, which is called the extractive industry. It is important in the sense that for you to have food security, for you to have your country secured, you must be able to produce what you eat, and you must not depend on other countries for what you consume in terms of food. But it cannot be a basis for the country to become a developed country. And even with the policies we've had, the agricultural sector has actually been in decline. The highest growth we saw in the agricultural sector was under when Akinwumi Adesina was the Minister of Agriculture. At the end of last year, the agricultural sector grew by only 2.12%, which is one of the lowest it has had grown in the past 7 years. So a couple of things are happening. One, previous policies on agriculture have been on handout of fertilizers and some food implements without addressing the core of the agricultural sector. And those cores should be, we must have an agricultural sector in private sector driven. We must encourage commercial agricultural activities. And we must also support agriculture with the basic infrastructure. Do we have irrigation?
Okay.
Do we have access to evacuate the food that is produced?
All right.
Do we have silos to make sure that we don't have wastages at the farm gates?
Okay.
These are critical.
Yeah, well, it's a big discussion, but let me take Dr. Mishakin's comments as well, since we seem to be running out of time. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I agree with him.
But it was the same agriculture that the First Republic used to literally
run this country.
Run the country.
Yeah.
Raised a lot of money from the groundnut pyramids, the cocoa industries, and all of those things.
It's easy
gave scholarships.
Yeah, it's easy
loads
to
of
cite
scholarships and bursaries.
But again, that was then. Globally, now you want to be among the League of Nations. You can. So let's ask the question: which of the developed countries or emerging economy are just championing agri? That doesn't mean you are not going to grow, because again, globally, when you look at the future of poverty among nations, many economists have concluded that agri, at the lowest level, the way it's being practiced, agri sector is a poverty-enhancing sector. At the way we are practicing it. Because the question should go beyond, where we have many people in agri. We have agri is the largest employer of labor. But when you compare the productivity, it's poor. It's
Doc,
poor.
what is stopping us from moving ahead and doing what other nations are doing in the area of agri? Why are we still at this subsistence level?
That's why we are discussing all this, and we hope that the government will. I know it's not something you just wake up and do, but it takes a lot of seriousness. It takes a lot of, consistency. It's not a matter of a government does a little and then another government got focused.
Which has been the problem.
Yes.
Which has been the problem.
Yes.
Now, I remember the vice president still talking about this agriculture bit. The vice president's office came up with the data sometime when I think it was in early 2020 or thereabouts, when we were talking about this National Livestock Transformation Plan. And they talked about the fact that the livestock value chain alone in Nigeria, the livestock value chain alone is 30 trillion naira. Or is it naira or dollars? I'm not even sure.
Enough to take care of our
Now,
entire budget.
the entire value chain of only livestock. And I'm not, of course, I'm not talking about several others, other bits of this thing. So if we look at the entire agricultural value chain, we definitely are talking about something. The leather bags that women use, they come from hides and skins. So, I mean, just...
But that doesn't translate to what you eventually produce, what you get to the market. So we produce a lot, we harvest a lot. Storage, zero. Transportation, zero. And so you have a time when mango will be everywhere, cheap.
Tomatoes.
And then the next month is gone. That is the issue. Okay. So that is a technology. That's how tech changes things. Okay. It's not just about what you're able to grow.
We have to
how
close.
do you get it to the markets?
We have to close, gentlemen. Yeah. So let me ask you this pointedly, a yes or no question.
Yes or no.
You may want to. Do you see a potential in agriculture for Nigeria?
Yes, I do.
Good. Mr. Chukwu, do you see a potential in agriculture for Nigeria as an economist?
Yes, but...
I knew it. I knew it. I knew it.
I was not going to say that.
Go ahead.
We need to improve on the agricultural value chain, but it will not make us a developed economy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for this conversation this morning. Mr. Johnson Chukwu is MD, Cowrie Asset Management Limited, as well as Dr. Olusegun Omishakin, Chief Economist and Director of Research and Development, Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts this morning.
Thank you.
So, Sunrise continues after now with something a little related. Stay with us.